Good afternoon and welcome to Liturgy in the Neighbourhood. We've been spending a few weeks now talking about Mr. Rogers and the way his shows are often symbols of and echo what happens in our own Christian church. And so liturgy is something, of course, that we as Anglicans know a lot about. Liturgy is something that also shaped Fred Rogers in his early days and continued to shape him as he became an adult. Fred Rogers grew up in a Presbyterian church. He recalls every Sunday sitting in between his mother and his father, listening to sermons, hearing the prayers, knowing the music inside and out. That shaped Mr. Rogers. That shaped who he was. When we think about ritual and liturgy, we know that once we go through the motions again and again, these motions make us who we are. The liturgy shapes us as we perform actions each week, as we say prayers, as we listen to music. It forms us and it grows us and it helps us to become the people that we are today. Mr. Rogers is quoted as saying about these rituals that they help us grow on the inside. Ritual helps us to grow on the inside. Fred Rogers knew this to be true, and so when it came time for him to create the television show, Mr. Rogers, liturgy was something that was important to him. He created and wanted to create a show that worked on routine and ritual. He knew that kids loved this routine, that they needed it, that they craved it. And so he did the same things week in and week out, day after day. The music was the same. Each day he would come in and take off his jacket, put on his sweater, zip up his cardigan. He would take his shoes off and he would put different shoes on. This time then became, and especially with those shoes, a time set apart. Putting on those running shoes meant it was time to be a little bit more relaxed. It was time to be together. And this time with those shoes on set apart the time for the kids and Mr. Rogers to be together. Set apart, of course, is a word or a definition that we would understand for the word holy. And so to be holy, for something to be holy, it is to be set apart. This time, Mr. Rogers understood that he had with the children every day was that very thing. It was set apart and it was holy, sacred time in which they did work together, in which they did important work together. There's a story that's told about what happened when the Gulf War broke out in 1991. Fred Rogers' company sent out a memo to PBS and explained that in the midst of a time of incredible crisis and chaos, when likely parents were upset and people were uncertain, his memo said that now more than ever, children need routine. Children need the same thing to be happening every day as Mr. Rogers appears on the screen doing the same things that he always did. And so knowing what to do comforts preschoolers, he is quoted as saying. It occurs to me that in churchland, when things are in chaos, when our lives are in chaos, when tragedy has happened, when death has occurred in our own lives or in the community, what we want to do more than anything often is get to church, is come to be in that space, not only with the people, but to do the thing that brings us comfort. To do and be part of a liturgy brings comfort in the midst of chaos. I think not only children, but adults need that comfort and need to know what to do and what comes next, especially in crisis. And so I think in times of crisis and chaos, we often are called back into the church, knowing that that routine and ritual will ground us. The word liturgy means the work of the people. It is the work that we do together, whether it's the work of the people that Mr. Rogers did with the children in the neighborhood, or it's the work that we do together on a Sunday morning. It is the work of the people. It's interesting to note that when we celebrate the Eucharist, it's actually not something that I, as the priest in the community, can do alone. That in fact, we can only have a Eucharist that is valid or that is authentic if others are there. And so I don't celebrate the Eucharist on my own and everyone else as a spectator, but it's something we do together. It is our work that we do. That liturgy, that work can only happen when we are all there together. Fred Rogers understood that as well, that it was the work of the people that was involved in his television show. And he was always very careful not to call it a show, but he spoke of Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, as a program. And those who watched the show were called those who used the show, not just spectators or watchers, but people who used it. And so those who were part of the show, who used the show in order to do the work, were known to have agency and activity over their own lives and what they were doing. It was not a passive thing. You didn't watch Mr. Rogers as a show you could be entertained by, but it was a program you used to grow and to be a part of. That idea of kids having agency and activity in their own neighborliness was so important to Fred. He was asked later on in life what his favorite poem was, and he spoke again about liturgy and ritual. And he spoke of his favorite poem as Psalm 23. And he said, these words, these lines are something that I have read over and over again. I have memorized them. And we memorize them often at the beginning of our lives, and they travel with us all of our days. Liturgy does that, whether it's the liturgy of the Fred Rogers show, which shaped us as children, which helped us to know that we were special and beloved, or whether it's the liturgy that we have in church that becomes part of our being, that is more than just words that are memorized, but that words that we embody and that we recall in times of crisis or trial. I remember the lines, of course, from the BCP as we prayed about God, whose property is always to have mercy. And in my own life, those words have come up again and again, usually when I'm messing up in one way or another. And I recall the fact that God's very nature, God's property, is to have mercy. These words shape us and form us. The work that we do together, the work of loving God, the work of loving neighbor, that is our work of liturgy. Rogers discipled millions of people into the work of neighborly love. Thanks for listening today, and I hope you're enjoying this series as we continue to explore the work, the life, the liturgy of Mr. Rogers.